The Alternative for Germany politician Guido Reil is in Brussels, the power center of the European Union.
I have to see where I need to go.
The road leads to the European Parliament. Reil is number 2 on the AfD list for the European elections. It's very likely he'll be earning his living here soon. His aim is to undermine the EU from within.
That's our idea, to be sand in the gearbox and open things up a bit.
Right-wing populists are on the advance throughout Europe. Together, they are flexing their muscles more than ever. For millions of followers, they offer hope and the promise of being part of a movement.
We used to be a Fiat 500. Now we'll soon be a Ferrari.
We take a look around Europe. Who votes for the right and why? In Italy, France, Germany, and Hungary. And what kind of Europe do the right-wing populists want?
In France, the French first. In Italy, the Italians.
Are they united only because they see a common enemy? Guido Reil lets a colleague show him around Molenbeek, a migrant district in Brussels. He thinks it's the perfect place for his message. He announced during the election campaign that he would actually move here. The AfD candidate loves stunts like this.
I wanted to move to Molenbeek, so when I come home each day, I can see why I'm fighting. I guess not all the streets in Molenbeek look like this. There must be a few corners where you can still live in safety.
It's Reil's first time in Molenbeek, and he's not even trying to talk to the people there, but he's quickly reached a verdict anyway. So many Muslims in one place makes him queasy. Of course, he says, he has no beef with other cultures. But well, Islam somehow.
I feel the freedom we have enjoyed for decades is under threat. I feel threatened by too many immigrants who come from a completely different cultural background, who have a completely different community of values, and they live according to them. But the worst is the fact that they practice their peculiarities openly.
Reil's solution is simple isolation. He wants to adopt a tough stance in Brussels. No common European asylum system and no quotas for the distribution of refugees. The AfD actually wants to abolish the EU Parliament, but as long as it's there, the AfD will use it as a stage.
If our borders were protected like the EU Parliament, I'd be a huge fan of the EU.
After several others step down, AfD leader Jörg Meuthen is the party's only MEP. He's hoping for new allies. Europe's right-wing populists are spread across several political groups. Meuthen is trying to forge a grand alliance.
In the end, it's all about winning votes. It's easier with a large group than with a small one. It's as simple as that. We'll be able to exert more political influence if we're part of the right-wing conservative camp.
Milan, a few days later. Meuthen is meeting Matteo Salvini, Italy's interior minister and leader of the Northern League, the Lega Nord. Salvini has called for a new right-wing alliance, and although only 3 European politicians have accepted his invitation so far, he's still attracting a lot of support.
I'm also representing the French, the Austrians, the Dutch, the Belgians, etc., etc., etc.
Italy's interior minister as a potential leader of a new right-wing Europe? He's celebrated on Italy's piazzas as a shock to the old political elite.
Politicians talk like politicians. But Salvini is different. He speaks the language of the people, of all of us.
Simone Capradossi is 37 years old and works as a caretaker in a municipal nursing home in Macerata in eastern Italy. He doesn't want to be filmed at work. He's a well-known Lega supporter, and his employer, the city's left-wing mayor, has his eye on him.
He calls us fascists, Nazis and all that. What he doesn't get is I'm not a racist. I only have something against the criminals who come to my homeland.
Macerata is actually a tranquil place. But last year it attracted national attention after a Nigerian was suspected of murdering an 18-year-old Italian woman. Then a right-wing radical went out and randomly shot at anyone with dark skin. Lega boss Salvini was under no illusions about who was morally responsible for the violence. The European Union's refugee and migration policies were flooding the country with illegal immigrants.
Even many migrants say to me, "Hey, Salvini, don't let anybody else in. There are already too many."
Salvini's rhetoric went down well in Macerata. In the parliamentary elections, the Lega jumped from less than 1% to almost 21% of the vote. And it's likely to take even more in the European elections. Many recent surveys show the Lega at over 30% across Italy. We go into the center of Macerata's old town to visit Salvaria Menichelli's shop. She also supports the Lega. In addition to kitchen knives and razors, she now also sells pepper spray because there are so many strangers in town.
Those Africans, I don't know if they bring the drugs from their countries, but they sell them here. Other ethnic groups are not so difficult. The Indians, for example, are nice, quiet people.
Generalizations like these are doing great harm to many here. Social worker Daniel Amanze is a native Nigerian and an Italian citizen. He's lived here for 40 years.
Racism is becoming more and more open. In the past, it was less visible. Now everything's exploded.
But plenty of people also oppose it. Lunch with the Montanis. One of the guests is Ibrahim from Mauritania. He's the second African refugee the family has taken into its home. The fact that Salvini's government refuses to allow refugee boats to dock and persecutes aid organizations makes them angry.
Salvini is only using fear. Fear of the stranger, of the migrant. But his scaremongering is a double-edged sword. So he also attacks anyone who disagrees with him and his policies, including us.
The Montanis don't get any money for their hospitality. They act out of conviction. Ibrahim will stay with them for up to a year.
It's really nice to be here.
What else could you say? You live with us.
No, it's true. You're my second family.
Daniel is angry that the government is increasingly neglecting its responsibilities when, for example, they cut funding for language and integration courses for migrants. It doesn't help society. On the contrary.
The slogans of the populists are worming their way into the heads of people who don't have much themselves. Salvini and his crew have started a war by inciting poor people against other poor people.
An apartment block, just a few minutes' drive away, symbolizes poverty and social tensions. Hundreds of people from dozens of nations live here, many of them illegally. Most of the original residents have moved away. Over the years, the block has changed beyond recognition. Salvini voter and Lega member Luca Davide lives on the third floor. He's one of the last Italians here. Luca's mother is visiting him today. She bought the apartment 4 decades ago.
It looked just wonderful here. How can I put it? It was like a fairy tale. There were great stalls downstairs, all nice and tidy. In the evening, we went down to the piazza. There was music, and we used to dance. It was really beautiful. Beautiful.
Today, the apartments here have lost their value, and nothing remains of the splendor of those bygone days. A lot of things have not worked here for a long time. Prostitution, drugs, and a lack of security are the biggest problems, Luca says.
In every other country of the world, the police will jump all over you if you commit a crime. It's just our country where people get away with it. Everyone in this house, no matter what country they come from, says the same. The police are more aggressive back home.
Interior Minister Salvini has already been here. He said he would help the residents and even have the building torn down. But that hasn't proved easy. The ownership structure alone is too complicated.
Of course, we know that Salvini is not a magician who can solve all our problems, but at least he inspires decent people like us to change things.
Luca and his mother don't think much of the European Union. Italy pays in too much money, they say, and gets too little out of it. A widely held opinion. Only 44% of Italians would vote in favor of remaining in the EU in a referendum, fewer than in any other member state. When Lega supporter Simone Capradossi walks his dog, he can still see the damage caused by the 2016 earthquake. He wanted more support, including from the EU.
I felt badly treated, like the son whose father won't give him anything. So, no, I certainly did not see myself as a citizen of Europe.
Simone's boss, Mayor Romano Carancini, acknowledges that the centre-left parties have gambled away a lot of trust in recent years, but he refuses to resign himself to the rise of the right in his city. And yet he believes the answer to many questions is more, not less, Europe.
We must defeat this sort of ignorance and Salvini's terrible motto, Italians first.
The mayor repeatedly invites us to information events highlighting the positive aspects of the EU, but not many citizens turn up. There's more going on at the Lega event, and wine and pizza. Salvini has even sent a senator to stir up the party's grassroots for the European election campaign, with great success.
We have grown up. The party is growing and growing. I always say, we used to be a Fiat 500, now we'll soon be a Ferrari.
Rome in springtime. And Italy's right-wing populists are trying to export their newly found self-confidence beyond their national borders. The Lega's youth wing has invited its counterparts from around Europe to meet in a hotel in the city centre. The Instagram generation is out in force as young European politicians mount the podium to fire off what seem more like war cries than political speeches.
Not us, but themselves are the true spiritual and political scavengers of our proud continent. And these people deserve nothing else but to be overrun.
The day's star guest is Jordan Bardella, the French right's top candidate. He may only be 23 years old, but he's already got big plans.
The current European Union does not work because it cannot defend the peoples of Europe. The nations want to emancipate themselves. We, the young generation of the right, call for a Europe of nations. And we could soon be the ones to govern this Europe together.
The right-wing populists in Brussels are also dreaming of this. German MEP Markus Buchheit is one of the manipulators in the background at the EU Parliament.
There you are.
Buchheit is young, eloquent, and well-connected. He's linked up with populists from Austria, France, and the Netherlands.
This is a party with a strong personality cult.
These personal ties bode well for the new alliance.
Yes, we appreciate German thoroughness. Marcus always does it well. The vote is important. You can ask each other questions. You always have to see if you can reach a compromise.
Buchheit used to be in the conservative CSU, but now he's got a career with the AfD. He too will probably soon be a member of the EU Parliament. His contacts are useful for the AfD, especially since the right-wing alliance has come across some sticking points. The Italians' debt policy, for example, annoys the head of the AfD.
If I think about fiscal and monetary policy, I can imagine that those very areas where we're doing well with migration policy will prove problematic for our monetary policies.
Political scientist Susie Denain says such contradictions are currently still largely hidden by the election campaign. She works for a pro-EU think tank and warns that populists could slow down the EU from within.
What they're doing instead is trying to create this idea of a Europe of sovereign nations. Within that, that means that the power lies at the national level. You take it away from the European level, and therefore they're not really interested in this more flexible, more responsive Europe that the reform ideas of Macron and Merkel have been trying to create. So for them, that is the advantage of paralysis, in showing that the institutions don't work, they aren't necessary, and power is better off at the national level.
According to surveys, right-wing populists can expect about a quarter of the seats in the EU Parliament. But what would cooperation look like then? And what about countries that violate the EU's democratic rules and values?
The agreement to these sanctions is only going to get harder in an environment where the far-right parties have a strong showing in these elections. And I think that that will be significant, because if it becomes clear that actually the EU can't agree these sanctions, then the threat falls away. And so I think we will see a kind of an increasing recognition that the EU is quite toothless.
Hungary is one country that would be well served by a toothless EU. Brussels is currently taking action against Prime Minister Viktor Orban's government, accusing it of systematically undermining democracy and restricting fundamental rights.
It's true. Hungary has changed. It has become a radical right-wing country. We are experiencing the rebirth of a world we have only known from history books, literature, or films.
Shortly before the broadcast of the political talk show Kutatfogás, regular commentator Sándor Csintalan, presenter István Deveny, and the other guests are preparing for the weekly show under very makeshift conditions. Last year, they were all sitting in a fancy TV studio. Then an oligarch loyal to Orban took over the station and kicked out the government-critical program. Now the show only runs on the internet, and they soon won't be able to afford that either.
We still have a lot of viewers, but hardly anybody places advertisements with us anymore. The companies don't want to make fun of the powerful and avoid us. The state advertisements, in turn, are distributed according to the political preferences of the government, so we don't get them either. That's how the Hungarian media landscape works now.
More and more private broadcasters and publishing houses in Hungary have been brought into Orban's line, as has state radio. Other media houses have closed down. Hungary has slipped to 87th in the world on the Reporters Without Borders press freedom rankings. We have an interview with Hungary's Minister of State for EU Relations. She disagrees.
I wouldn't say in any event that they are limited in the expression, not to mention the social media. You can put everything on the net what you want to express. So this is a clear disinformation.
So is Hungary just a victim of fake news? Many here see it that way, including Katalin Hampel, a fashion designer known in Budapest. Her shop in the city center sells traditional costumes to both locals and tourists. She sees herself as a kind of cultural ambassador.
The clothes we sell are meant to reflect Hungarian values, the history of our great nation, the importance of Hungary.
Katalin Hampel is an Orban fan. As an entrepreneur, she benefits from low taxes. But it is not just the government's economic policy that she approves of. Orban's Fidesz party could make Hungary strong again. She doesn't think democracy is in danger.
Think about it. Orban has won 3 elections in a row and has a 2/3 majority. The Hungarians want him. That's something you in Western Europe finally have to accept.
Illiberal democracies, as Orban himself once called the form of government he aspired to, are admired by right-wing populists throughout Europe and viewed critically by their opponents. Canadian Michael Ignatieff is a university rector and has been observing Orban's system for a long time.
An illiberal democracy is a democracy in which you have elections, but you don't have any of the counterbalancing institutions that balance majority rule.
Ignatieff's Central European University has itself become a plaything of Orban's policies. Last year, it decided to move part of its campus from Budapest to Vienna as the government increased pressure. Orban sees the university's founder, Hungarian-American billionaire George Soros, as an enemy of the state, declaring, "Soros wants to destabilize Hungary and Europe."
George Soros and his non-governmental organizations want to attract 1 million migrants a year to the European Union.
If George Soros didn't exist, they'd have to invent him. This kind of politics needs an enemy. They've created an enemy. The idea that George Soros is responsible for the migration flows is a paranoid fantasy, but it's a useful one. It has no basis in fact, but it allows them to mobilize their political base in this country.
And that grassroots base lives mainly in the countryside. Andrzej Fozekos is a wine grower about a 2-hour drive from Budapest. He says he's very interested in politics.
The Fidesz government is the only one you can trust. It follows a clear path because it's committed to Hungarian interests. That's why we elected it.
Andrzej says he is proud of his white wines, but also of his homeland. What he likes about Viktor Orban is that he is committed to Hungarian families and against migration. The fact that virtually no foreigners live in the area does not detract from the fear.
When the flood of migration reaches us, we're done for. I don't know how well you know Hungarian history, but we've already stood against the Tartars and Turks. We've defended Europe against Islam several times.
Orban is also against Muslim immigrants settling in Hungary. Many of his supporters couldn't care less whether he joined Salvini's new right-wing alliance or not. The main thing for them is his continued opposition to the distribution of refugees within the EU.
Even legal migration is in reality just a cover name for a population exchange program in Europe. That's what the election's about.
Population exchange, a phrase straight out of the right-wing conspiracy theorists' handbook. But despite all the anger at the EU's policies, Hungary is still happy to take agricultural subsidies and other financial aid from Brussels. We drive home on motorways co-financed by the EU. Hungary receives more than 3 billion euros from the EU budget each year. Nevertheless, a lot of Hungarians live in great poverty, and the young and well-educated are leaving the country. Blanka Nagy is 19 years old and will graduate from high school this year. If possible, she wants to stay in Hungary and study. But a lot of people aren't making her life easy right now.
I'm subjected to repeated verbal attacks. Messages from strangers say I should die, that I should have died in my mother's womb. I'm trying to ignore all this.
Last winter, this blurred internet video made Blanka famous. She was at a demonstration against Orban's policies and threats to the rule of law, and she launched a foul-mouthed tirade against the government as a disgusting gang of thieves. She's been publicly hunted down ever since. Commentators and journalists close to Fidesz have been reporting on her private life and even making fun of her school grades on television. Blanka says she follows the media circus with bewilderment and disgust. Most of the media don't mention that her protest has a serious background. Blanka's father died of cancer in 2015. Since then, she has mainly directed her scorn at the Hungarian health system.
There are people lying on gurneys in the hallways and nobody cares. And then I hear that the government is once again building a stadium. Or a friend of the government has been seen with a €30,000 watch. That really makes you think.
Every now and then, a bubble bursts in Hungary, and people take to the streets to protest against labor laws, the restructuring of the judiciary, corruption, and the system as a whole.
Fidesz, you have failed in 3 important subjects: integrity, humanity, and honesty.
But the opposition is in the minority here. Their opponents, who present Brussels as an enemy, have the upper hand. They're likely to win further victories in the near future, including in the European elections. Back to Essen and the Ruhr Valley in Germany, the home of AfD candidate Guido Reil. The former miner spent 26 years in the liberal SPD, then he switched to the AfD. The party has used his working-class roots, promoting him as the miner for Europe. But others have sprayed his house with graffiti. Reil doesn't see himself as a right-wing agitator and believes people here understand what he's talking about.
What are they doing up there? Nothing. They make sure bananas are crooked and cucumbers have got to be like this. But for the people themselves, they have nothing left for them. The refugees will affect pensions. They'll finally have to start closing the borders.
But many questions go unanswered. Reil says he is fighting for little people in the AfD's fractious social policy debate, and he also avoids complex questions.
I'm not someone who knows everything like a true professional politician. I'm just learning. I'm a hobby politician. I'm a minor.
Hobby politician and number 2 on the party's MEP list.
I talk to media coaches and reject that I need 3 points on each topic and everyone will think I'm smart. But no, I'd just be a talking dummy who practiced the answer. I don't ever want to be that.
Reil hurries from appointment to appointment. Students at the Camp Lintfort High School have invited politicians to a panel discussion. A lot of students took part in the climate demos. Reil's AfD calls it climate hysteria.
Mr. Reil, the AfD denies climate change. What's your opinion?
There's no evidence of man-made climate change whatsoever. There's no evidence whatsoever that CO2 is responsible in any way. And the best thing is, there's no evidence that 1 or 2 degrees warmer might not be quite beneficial. We've had these warm phases before. When Rome was at its zenith, it was much warmer, yet we were no worse off.
Politics beyond all scientific knowledge. Reil tries again and again to dominate the podium with his ideas.
Europe has never really worked. All the projects they take on never really work. They talk about peace, security, and prosperity. Only it's not true.
I have to directly disagree. This is so wrong that not even the opposite is right. We don't always have to say that everything's great. I don't like all the government's policies, yet I don't question the Federal Republic all the time.
Reil says he wants to encourage the students to think. But his statements draw some criticism.
In some respects, he may be right that not everything in the EU works, but you can't solve that by simply abolishing the EU or taking away some of its opportunities to do better. As the other politicians have said, the only thing we can do is strengthen it.
There is still this feeling, this disquiet. Something's going wrong. AfD officials call Germany an opinion dictatorship, whereas the party says its truth is the only truth. This has eroded public confidence in democracy.
Well, democracy looks different.
Exactly, freedom of speech.
Yes, absolutely.
Freedom of speech should be the supreme good, but you just can't have the wrong opinion.
That's how it is.
So, the AfD.
No other party comes into question.
Why not?
Yeah, why? There are too many arguments to go into in detail.
What are the most important ones?
Well, I'll try to sum it up. A lot of things aren't going right here, are they?
The feeling of not being understood by the powerful. In France, that's driven a lot of people out onto the streets. On Saturdays, the Yellow Vests always call for Emmanuel Macron's resignation, even in Lille in northern France. The demos started in protest at the president's reforms. Now, some are even talking about revolution. Didier and his friends come regularly. They want to see more direct democracy, lower taxes, and higher minimum wages. They see the European elections in a purely French light.
If Macron's party wins the European elections, he'll say, the French want me to continue. I want to prevent that, so I'm going to vote.
My family can't really complain. I'm a lawyer and my husband is a computer scientist, and we have a child. But we pay far too much in taxes. We're still making quite a good living. But we have to be here because of everything else that isn't going well.
They're still undecided who to vote for. Marine Le Pen would like to direct their anger to the ballot box with votes for her right-wing populist party, formerly the Front National, the National Front, now called Rassemblement National, National Rally. Macron is the perfect target for them. Le Pen and top candidate Bardella make a commitment to the party's grassroots.
It's about beating Macron.
That's what many people in Denain think, too. It was once a prosperous steel and mining town, but that's now history. The poverty rate here is more than 40%. Joseph Sauvage owns one of the bars that hasn't had to close. His regular customers keep him afloat. They eat dinner together once a month and recall better times.
So, in the 80s and 90s, they tore this place down, all these buildings. We're right here. All that here was Usinor. The company, the sports field, the district, all that belonged to the company.
We were the richest here in the north.
They have experienced a lot of change, first economic, then political. Denain used to be communist, then socialist. But the left lost a lot of ground and left a gap to be filled by the right-wing populists. In the presidential election, a large proportion did not vote at all. Of the rest, 57% voted for Le Pen. Joseph openly says he supports her.
This is discontent.
If you gave them a little more money, they'd go to a restaurant. They'd boost the economy and have a good time.
People can't live on 800 and 900 euro. The same goes for pensioners. We've been demanding purchasing power for 20 weeks. But Macron's gone deaf. He's not listening.
Macron's opponent, Le Pen, wants to capitalize on this discontent. Her manifesto preaches economic patriotism, French goods, French workers, France first. And leading candidate Jordan Bardella demands that migrants should take a back seat.
I prefer to choose, with the means of the state, which are becoming more and more limited, to help our poor, our unemployed, and our pensioners. It's common sense.
But Macron is fighting back. He wanted to reform France and remake the EU and present himself as a counterpoint to Le Pen and Salvini.
We live in a world of migration. I don't believe in walls.
Back in Lille, citizens meeting without all the presidential razzmatazz are still discussing the same issues: ecology, democracy, taxes.
Macron is often accused of being a president of the big cities. Giving people a voice at the local level is important.
Everyone has something to discuss here. But one issue still seems to dominate: Emmanuel Macron, seen by his critics as the president of the rich since the abolition of the wealth tax.
Some may think the abolition of the wealth tax is good. Others don't. But maybe a higher tax should be levied on luxury goods.
The problem is that we tax very little of the assets that consist of enormous blocks of stocks. So people constantly make up to 10% return in share trading.
Macron, they say later, now has to prove that he has got the message. His town hall dialogues have raised expectations, and now he is making concessions to the Yellow Vests.
I want to provide relief for people who work and significantly reduce income taxes. We need to see how we finance this.
Macron's offer might have brought him a little breathing space, but many think that's still too little. People in Denain don't feel his policies are aimed at them anyway. A good 35% of the people here are without a job. The right-wing populists have conquered the city. Vincent Jarousseau is fascinated by the social fractures and has photographed Denain and its people for a graphic novel. He called it The Roots of Anger.
What fascinated me was giving people a face and a voice. People who would otherwise be made invisible.
The right-wing populists are also interested in those people. They present themselves as attentive listeners, whereas the socialist mayor is absent.
The National Rally, formerly National Front, has always defended the French people. We're not defending the international corporations or the EU. We're defending the interests of France. The people here in the village are very sensitive. They understand that. That's why they choose us.
This is where they're trying to win over undecided voters. And there are votes to be won here. Loïc Dufour survives with odd jobs and says he's neither right nor left-wing. The rally team wants to meet him.
Yes, the Member of Parliament wanted to meet me, talk to me in his office. Why not? I didn't reject his offer, I accepted.
So the right-wing populists are trying to expand their network in Germany. like here in Offenburg. An AfD meeting on the one side and counter-demonstrators on the other. There is great resistance to the AfD. Police provide a buffer between the camps.
This is not a democratic project where everyone can feel at home. This is a project of exclusion, of selfishness, and I'm demonstrating against it here today.
The AfD says it wants to defend Europe in Brussels. Its speeches are full of fear and pathos, as if our very survival is at stake.
We are the last chance for our culture, for democracy, which was invented in Europe, for humanism, for enlightenment. We are the last chance for European freedom.
Those who are destroying Europe, their names are Juncker, Timmermans, Schulz, Draghi, Merkel, Weber. These are the destroyers of the European idea, ladies and gentlemen.
But the right-wing vision of the future is still rather vague, and not only in Germany. Right-wing populists, above all, emphasize what or whom they are against. If you ask them what they're for, they often resort to slogans such as Europe of Nations. Susie Dennison warns against getting drawn in by what she sees as a trick.
That framing of it being kind of Le Pen versus Macron, or in a wider European sense of it being the Macron vision of Europe versus that of Orban or Salvini, I think is very much the way that the far right are trying to frame these elections. But I think that it would be a mistake for the pro-European parties, including Macron, to work with that. I think it's far more important to sell the importance, to mobilize European voters through the idea of what Europe can deliver on.
The right-wing populists have an easier job, simply targeting the enemy in Brussels, which could pay off for them in the coming European elections.